For today's episode, I thought I would upload a recording of a workshop that I did about what to do if you're experiencing pain in the climbing gym during training. I hope you guys find this episode valuable. Some of my views on certain things, really subtle things, have been updated a little bit recently, but I still think that this conversation is really useful. This is a workshop that I did to promote a group training program that I launched called Resilient AF. I've thought about bringing it back. If somebody's interested in that, definitely reach out and let me know. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the recording. Welcome to the Strong AF podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Barnes. I'm a strength and rehab coach for climbers, and I blend my 24 years of expertise and experience as an elite level climber, competitive powerlifter, and rehab professional to bring you a podcast that will help you become stronger and more resilient. In this podcast, we'll talk about all things strength training for climbers. We'll also talk about climbing injuries, rehab, and why training and rehab go hand in hand. To connect, be sure to follow me over on Instagram at Natasha Barnes. To find out more about coaching or getting help with an injury, check out my website at natashabarnesrehab.com. And now, let's get to the episode. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? I'm going to give you guys some education on pain and injury. We're going to talk a lot about that actually. And then you're also going to get some actionable things you can do if you get injured. So I'm going to give you some advice and some things, some strategies and some steps that you can take if you get injured or if you experience pain during training. We're also going to talk about when to seek professional help. Obviously in some cases you might want to talk to a professional about the pain you're experiencing. So I'm going to talk about how to know when to do that. Okay, injury is the price we pay for not having sat around on our asses, you guys. It's kind of an inevitable part of being an athlete, and I think we should normalize it a little bit, because if we don't, then a lot of people have really negative expectations and negative beliefs about pain and injury, and that can actually lead to worse outcomes. These things happen. When we're training and we're athletes, we're pushing ourselves to the edge, and you may experience pain, you may experience an injury. It's going to happen. And I think knowing more about pain and how to deal with injury is really, really important as an athlete. And that's why I'm doing this presentation for you guys. If you manage to go your whole climbing career without getting hurt, you're either not really pushing yourself or you got really lucky. So I think this is really, really important information. And, most people here have probably been injured or maybe will be injured in the future. Not to be negative, but it happens. Pain is also a normal human experience. Pain is normal. Pain is good. Pain keeps us safe. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And a big thing to realize is that pain is actually just a warning signal. It's not a reliable indicator of tissue damage. So you can have a lot of pain and not a lot of tissue damage. You can also have a lot of tissue damage and not a lot of pain. That's a real thing. So pain is a construct of the brain 100% of the time. And I'm going to tell you two stories that will hopefully convince you of this. So these are just some photos from the stories. Actually, the boot one I just found online. I don't think it's not the actual boot, but you get the point. So let's talk about these stories. The New England Journal of Medicine posted a case study of a construction worker, builder, who jumped down onto a board. He ended up landing on a nail, as you can see in this photo right here. He landed on a 5-inch nail. It went right through his boot. It actually missed the steel cap. He was wearing a steel-toed boot. This man was in excruciating pain, and they had to take him to the hospital. And at the hospital, they did an x-ray to see what was going on inside there. After the x-ray, the doctor comes in the room, pulls the boot off the builder. And of course, the builder's screaming in agony because the doctor just ripped the boot off and there's a nail going through his foot, or so he thought. And it turns out that the nail actually went through between the webbing of his toes, between his big toe and his second toe. It didn't actually puncture his foot, yet he was experiencing a significant amount of pain. He was screaming and yelling. He was sweating profusely. They even gave him like a powerful painkiller. He was still experiencing pain, but he had no tissue damage. The reason he was having pain was because of the expectation of pain. He jumped down onto a nail, he felt something, immediately he thought he had injured his foot. And so his brain gave him that pain. So that's an example of how you can have a lot of pain and no tissue damage. Kind of an interesting story, right? And let's talk about this other photo here. So in this other photo, this is a soldier from the Civil War. I'm actually not sure if this is the actual soldier or not, but this soldier got injured from a cannonball blowing up his limb, basically. It's a blast wound. And the case study that was written about him basically said that he was in the hospital, super calm, super collected, super cool, didn't have any pain, didn't have an arm anymore also, but he was totally fine. Probably because during the moment, he was more worried about dying and getting off the battlefield than anything else that was going on, including what was happening at his arm. He didn't have any pain, and he didn't actually experience any pain until after they did a surgery to like repair his arm. So this is an example of a situation where you can have significant tissue damage and no pain. Pretty crazy, right? A lot of that has to do with what your brain is telling you at the time. So we've all heard stories about how like a soldier in battle can get shot and not even know that they're shot, not even feel the pain of that bullet wound. Meanwhile, like I can be sitting here working at my desk and get a paper cut, and it's the most excruciating thing I've ever experienced, even though it's just a paper cut. So let's talk about some things that affect pain. Your expectations definitely affect pain. So if you go back to that construction worker with the boot, he was expecting to have a foot injury, so he experienced context can affect your pain. If you're somewhere dark and scary, you might expect to get mugged or get scared or something, but if it's sunlight out, maybe you're not expecting that. Context can affect pain too. Placebo and nocebo can affect pain. So we've all heard about the placebo effect. I can give you a pill and tell you that that pill is going to reduce your pain. Meanwhile, it can be a sugar pill, and you're still going to have a reduction in pain because of your expectation, because of the placebo effect. Meanwhile, the nocebo effect, if you've never heard of that, that's a negative expectation or negative pain expectation in this case. I can give you a pill and say, oh, there's a side effect to this pill. You're probably going to get a stomach ache. And guess what? You're probably going to get a stomach ache. That's the nocebo effect. So it's important to know about placebo and nocebo because those things can definitely affect your pain. And in fact, we've done some research to show that even when you're made aware of the placebo, you can still get relief from something that's a placebo. They've done studies on this with pills and creams. People were told they were going to get some relief. They got relief. They were told, just kidding, it's a placebo. They still got relief. So our brains are pretty powerful when it comes to pain and when it comes to a lot of different things. Another thing that can affect pain is your brain's perception of threat. So how dangerous is this situation to me? How dangerous is this situation to your brain? The more dangerous the situation, the more, the more the chances are you're going to get more pain. So let's talk about a few more stories here because I think these are super interesting. Pain expectations are so powerful that they can actually reverse the effect of powerful drugs. So there's a study done, patients who had tooth pain, they were given nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. And then all the patients were given the laughing gas. They were split into two groups. So group A was told that the nitrous oxide would relieve their pain. Group B was told that the nitrous oxide would increase their sensitivity and awareness of pain. What do you think happened? Well, the nitrous oxide caused the opposite reaction depending on what their expectations were, what they were told. So group A, who was told that the nitrous oxide would relieve their pain, experienced less pain. Group B, who was told the nitrous oxide would increase their sensitivity and awareness to pain, experienced more pain. So just that power of suggestion and the power of the brain can affect our experience. Okay, that was fun. Let's do another story. So I love this story. This is a really, really interesting one. So pain expectations are so powerful. Again, they can reverse the effect of powerful drugs. So there was a study in 2011 that was done that showed the effects of a drug can change depending on whether or not you're aware that you're taking it. So, in other words, like if you take a drug and you don't know you're on it, is it going to work? Well, they did a study on this. So, a hot laser stimulus, so they had a hot laser. Basically, they were like burning people's skin, not bad enough to actually cause a skin injury, but bad enough to cause like some pain and discomfort. And the laser was applied to some patients, and their pain level was recorded. Their original pain level was 66 out of 100. I don't know why they did 66 out of 100. Makes more sense to me to do maybe like 6 out of 10, but whatever. This is what they did for the study. So they did that, recorded their original pain level. They hooked up the patients to what the patients were told was a saline solution. They were told, we're just getting you ready for the experiment. This is just a saline solution to get you ready for the rest of it. Little did they know, they were actually being given a drug called remifentanil, which is an opioid. It's a fast-acting opioid that is 240 times more powerful than morphine. Okay, they gave the patient the drug. They recorded the pain level again. Remember, the patients didn't know they were on the drug. They thought they were on saline. So the pain level was recorded 55 out of 10. Okay, makes sense. A little bit lower. They're on pain drug. They don't know it, but it's got to be doing something, right? Cool. And so after that, the patients were actually told they were going to be given a powerful pain medication. Then they were told they were put on the remifentanil, but nothing changed. They were already on it. So the only thing that changed was that they were being made aware that they were on it. They applied the laser again and recorded their pain. 39 out of 100 was the average. So actually, the drug was made 30% more effective by the patients just being made aware that they were on something that they were already on. Pretty crazy, right? So all that changed was that they were aware. So then what happened was the patients were told they'd be taken off the drug, but actually nothing changed still. They kept them on the drug. They applied the laser again and recorded the patient's pain levels, and they were 66 out of 100 in pain. That's the original pain level that they had before they were even given the drug. All that changed was that the patient's thinking that they were being taken off of the drug. That's a negative expectation. That could be a nocebo. Negative expectations can completely reverse the effect of an opioid that is 240 times more powerful than morphine. That's pretty crazy. That's the power of the mind. And how do you think that's affecting other experiences that we have in the world? Not just with pain, but with lots of other things, but especially with pain. Our expectations are really, really, really important. And that's what I'm hoping you guys can see here. So let's talk a little bit more about pain and how it actually works. So kind of the old school thinking on pain and like maybe what a lot of people have learned in school about pain is goes something like this. So you touch a cactus spine. You already know what that's going to feel like when you see that photo. The mechanical force of the spine on your skin triggers nociception, which is a nerve signal about potential damage. That signal reaches your brain, and your brain concludes you're under threat, and it creates pain, which encourages protection, which causes you to withdraw your finger and gasp. Ow, sharp, right? That's kind of the old school way of thinking about how pain works, and it's not the complete picture, actually. So let's talk about what the new school thinking actually is. I want to talk to you, in order to talk about the new school way of thinking about pain, we need to talk about something called predictive coding, or another way of calling it is predictive processing. Predictive coding is a fascinating model for perception. According to the predictive coding theory, our brain is always building and refining its model, basically, of the outside world and of our bodies. Our perceptions depend in large part on these models that our brain has, not just the incoming sensory data. So it's not just things that you're seeing and feeling that's important. It's also these models that our brains have built about what the outside world looks like and what things mean. This is really important to understand. So it's kind of like a top-down, bottoms-up approach. So it's not just like the example that I gave you earlier, which is the old school thinking. That situation can happen, but your brain is also scrutinizing what's going on and matching it with what it knows: past experiences, knowledge, beliefs, culture, past successful behaviors observed in others, all of those things. And so it's not just that bottom up approach of like, a thing is sharp, sharp is dangerous, pull hand away. It's like, a thing is sharp. What does this mean? Is this something I should be worried about? Wait, I know cactus spines are sharp, so probably I should pull my hand away. There's a lot more going on here. It's a top-down, bottom-up approach, and hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Kind of trying to simplify it a little bit.
So at this point in the presentation, I showed some visuals that aren't really going to make sense here on the podcast. So I'll make sure to share these on Instagram and hopefully in the show notes so that you guys can reference them and see what I'm talking about to go along with this next part of the podcast, which I thought about editing out, but I think it's actually pretty important to talk about predictive processing here.
How many of you guys messed that up? Let's be honest. I know I did. That is predictive processing right there. Your brain is predicting what you're going to see and just making it make sense for you. But really, that top line doesn't make sense. That's pretty funny, right? I love that one. How about this one? According to a research study at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. So if you can read this, this is predictive processing. This is your brain making things make sense, even though what we're actually looking at doesn't make sense. This is predictive processing in action. So why am I telling you all this? Well, you should be stoked because you can change your expectations. We can reframe pain and we can retrain our response to pain. If we know that pain doesn't always equal tissue damage, then that means that some of the time when we're experiencing pain, we might not actually be damaging ourselves. And if we can realize that, then we can kind of reframe our pain experience and retrain our response to pain, which is a really important thing when it comes to dealing with injuries in training. Sometimes you can have a lot of pain when you get an injury and, there might not be a whole ton like wrong with the tissue, and knowing how to deal with that is important. So let's talk about some actionable things that you can do if you get injured. Here's kind of like a summary. One of the things is going to be to address unhelpful thoughts, cognitive distortions. We want to reframe things. We also want to introduce movement in a non-threatening way. We want to use graded exposure to do that. So we're going to talk about that. And we also want to decrease our brain's perception of threat. And both of these things that I just mentioned above tie into that. Number one, addressing unhelpful thoughts. So one of the things that is really important when you get hurt or when you feel pain is to address cognitive distortions that may be going on. Okay. What are cognitive distortions? If you've never heard about them before, they're just habitual ways of thinking about things or perceiving things that fail to accurately reflect reality. So some examples of that are like all or nothing thinking, like really black and white thinking. There's only two ways to look at something. Catastrophizing, so, making things out to be worse than they are. fear avoidance, being afraid to do something or be in a position or something like that, so you avoid it. Close crimping is dangerous, therefore I never do it. That's a fear avoidance behavior. That's a cognitive distortion. Fortune telling, magnifying, so exaggerating like how bad something really is in your mind. Discounting the positive, like sometimes there's positives to what's going on and we don't look at those when we're experiencing pain. We only look at the bad things. Shoulding, etc. All of these things are cognitive distortions. Here's a cognitive distortion: I have shoulder pain and a labral tear on MRI, and exercise is just going to make it worse. There's nothing I can do, so I should just rest and get surgery. So, that's kind of all or nothing thinking. Like, just because you have a labral tear on an MRI, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have shoulder pain. Just because you have shoulder pain doesn't necessarily mean that that's because of that labral tear. Exercise will make it worse. That could be catastrophizing. That could be magnifying. That could be discounting the positive because maybe there's some exercises that won't make it worse. There's nothing I can do about it, so I should just rest and get surgery. Catastrophizing, that's catastrophizing right there. So there's a lot of things that are cognitive distortions, and a lot of these things don't happen consciously. Like, they happen unconsciously. So cognitive distortions, so like the all or nothing thinking, that defines a situation as all good or all bad without an in-between. So an example of that would be, I never sleep well, I'm just not a good sleeper. That's all or nothing thinking. Fortune telling is an example of a cognitive distortion that judges the future in a purely negative light. So an example of that would be, it's taking me way too long to fall asleep. There's no way I'm going to feel rested enough to get through tomorrow. This is a disaster. It's fortune telling. Magnifying a situation to make it seem worse than it is. Example, I wake up 20 times every night. I might as well not sleep at all for how bad of sleep I get. Discounting the positive, when you tell yourself that something good doesn't count or doesn't matter. I slept for 4 hours last night, which is nowhere near the 8 hours I'd like to get. Well, you got some sleep, right? So that's good. We can look at it that way. Overgeneralizing is another one I didn't list here, but that's where you extend one bad situation to all similar situations. An example of that can be, I tried some mindful sleeping techniques once and they didn't work. I just can't be helped. I'll just be a bad sleeper forever. Shouldings, another example, shoulding, where you focus on how you believe that things should be instead of how they are. So an example of that is, I should get 8 hours of sleep or else it's not worth sleeping at all. So these are just like some examples of cognitive distortions that come up for people around pain, and especially with like chronic pain, but they can come up for all kinds of things, not just pain. So these are really important to be aware of. And the first thing that we want to do if we're experiencing any pain is we want to address these unhelpful thoughts, because having these unhelpful thoughts can actually make our outcomes worse. The more negative you feel about a situation, the worse it's going to be and the more pain you're going to have. So we have to know how to address these things. So here's an action item for you. This is what I want you to do if you find yourself having these thoughts. This is what we're going to do. We are going to set aside a few minutes in a quiet place. I want you to create a sheet with 3 different columns, okay? And the first column, I want you to write every negative belief that comes to your mind about pain. You can do this in general, or you can do this for a specific instance of pain. So write down every negative belief that comes to mind about pain. Take as much time as you need to do this. The recommended time is like 15-20 minutes to do this whole exercise. And then in that second column, what you're going to do is, for each item that's listed in the first column, I want you to challenge that belief. Challenge that negative belief that you have. Is there any evidence that this may not be true? Do you know this for a fact, or are there assumptions at play? For example, I have a slap tear, therefore I'm going to have shoulder pain. Do you know that for a fact? Do you know for a fact that slap tears cause shoulder pain? Because actually, you're making some assumptions there. The research that we have on slap tears say that actually for overhead athletes, which climbers are, there is a high prevalence of slap tears asymptomatically. So that means most of us walking around out there who are climbers and can climb at a high level probably have a slap tear, but are not experiencing shoulder pain. So if you think you see a slap tear on an MRI and that's why you have shoulder pain, you might be making some assumptions there. And that's something that you should learn more about. Not saying that like your slap tear is not causing your pain, but a lot of times it's not the reason why people have pains. That's just one example. So write down all the evidence that you have, oh, I can't climb. It hurts. I just shouldn't climb at all. Is that true? Like, is there some level of climbing that you can do that doesn't hurt your shoulder pain? Because there probably is, like, yeah, you can't climb a burly 513, but you can sure as hell get on a 5'9" that's vertical, or get on the trad climb instead. Is it true that climbing just hurts it, you shouldn't climb at all? Maybe not. So you should write that down. And then in the third column, what I want you to do is replace the statement from the first column with a more accurate statement. I have shoulder pain because of a slap tear, therefore I can't climb. Instead, I have shoulder pain, but there are things I can do that don't aggravate that pain. And these are the things. And I want you to keep rewriting those things until it feels absolutely true to you. This is a technique for reframing pain. This is a cognitive behavioral therapy technique. And you can do this for anything. But this works really, really well with pain, especially if you're feeling particularly stuck, particularly worried about the pain you're experiencing or about an injury that you're dealing with. The other thing is, as you go about your day, as you go about your training, as you go about your rehab process, I want you to notice when your mind slips back into these negative thought patterns. And as frequently as you can, I want you to replace them with your new reframed belief. This kind of thinking, it takes a lot of time to develop this way of thinking in order to like reframe your beliefs. It takes a lot of practice. So you're going to have those thoughts recur. You're going to have to practice reframing these things. But this is a really good action item. This is something that I teach some of my clients to do when they're struggling with pain or they feel really stuck. This is like a really, really good technique that you can use. Okay, and then let's talk about the second thing that you can do if you're experiencing pain. So the second thing is we want to reintroduce movement in a non-threatening way. So when we have pain, we want to keep training for the most part. Complete rest is almost never the answer when you have pain. There's a lot of things that we can do to keep you training. We can change the range of motion of an exercise. For example, let's say you are doing an overhead press and the beginning part of the movement causes your shoulder some pain. Well, you can start the movement from a little bit higher and only do that part of the range of motion. Let's say a squat, going into a deep squat causes some knee pain. Well, we can grade your exposure back to a deep squat by starting with a squat that's a little bit higher, that maybe you only go down as high as to right before you experience the pain, and you get some training in that range of motion. And then eventually you gradually reintroduce a deeper and deeper range of motion. That's something that you can do for climbing, for like elbow pain. A lot of times, like if someone's having like an elbow tendinopathy, vertical climbing can actually cause a lot of elbow pain for people who have a sensitive elbow. A lot of it is because with vertical climbing, you're getting into a more like a deeper, more locked off position. So what we can do for those people is have them climb on a steep wall, and the steeper the wall, the better, because you're not going to be able to lock off as deeply, which is going to be less sensitive for your elbow. We can change the range of motion of an exercise. We can change the intensity of an exercise. So, if somebody comes to me and they're like, oh, I'm having some back pain with my deadlift. Well, we're not going to just like completely scrap the deadlift. Like maybe there's a weight they can do that doesn't bother their back. And I do this all the time when people come to see me with back pain. The first thing we do when they come in is I have them deadlift. And they're always like, what? You're going to make me deadlift? Like, I have back pain. What are you talking about? We can always find some weight that they can do that doesn't bother their back. And that's where we start. Same thing with any exercise. You can change the intensity. Maybe you can't climb 513 because it bothers your shoulder, it bothers something, but you can climb a little bit easier than that, and that seems to be okay, and that can be a good starting point. We can change up the exercise variation. So maybe you have a finger injury and hangboarding on a crimp is like a no-go for you. We can do something a little different. We can use a tension block instead. So maybe like hanging on a hangboard doesn't feel good, but we can do some open hand hanging on a tension block where we're changing the intensity of the exercise, but we're also doing a slightly different variation, and that's tolerable, and that can be a good entry point for you. Another example of that would be like shoulder pain on an overhead press. Some people get shoulder pain with the barbell overhead press. Well, what if we do a dumbbell, like a single arm dumbbell press? Sometimes that's actually okay. So it's a different variation, but it's a way to get them back to overhead pressing. There's always something that we can do, that we can change, where we can still train even if we're having pain. And these are just some examples of that. So the biggest thing that you want to do is finding an entry point for movement. First thing I always look at is intensity. Can we change the intensity and can you still do it? Second thing, range of motion. Can we change the range of motion and you can still do it? Third thing, exercise variation. Can we change the variation and can you still do it? There's always going to be something that you can do, and we're all about finding that entry point is the first step. Not only does remaining active help your healing process, but it decreases your brain's perception of threat, and it retrains your brain to see the movement as safe. And that's really, really important. We want to continue engaging in that range of motion or in that exercise because we want your brain to feel safe. So I don't want you to be so scared of your shoulder pain that you completely stop climbing. Let's do a little bit of easy climbing. And, that can sometimes calm your nervous system down a little bit. And then we can slowly grade your exposure back into climbing and retrain your brain to see climbing as safe again, and you stop having pain. We do this all the time in rehab with my clients. And it's important for you guys to kind of have these ideas in your mind and understand like how to do this, because that's going to give you some self-efficacy in your rehab process and some self-efficacy with pain. And that's really, really important because research does show that the more self-efficacy people have, the better their pain outcomes are. So the more you feel like you can help yourself in a situation where you're experiencing pain, the better off you are. The last thing we want is for you to feel completely helpless and feel like the only thing that's going to help you is a surgery, or the only thing that's going to help you is a doctor, or the only thing that's going to help you is a pain medication or something like that, because that's not something you can control. You have to rely on something else or somebody else for that, and that can actually worsen your pain outcome. So super important. This is just an example of what I'm talking about here. So a lot of times when clients come to see me for injuries, for example, like a finger injury, the first thing we're doing is trying to figure out their entry point. Where can we start loading you? Because that's what your body needs to start healing. And sometimes we can't start with hangboarding, like on the left here. Sometimes hangboarding, even in an open hand position for someone with a finger injury, is just way too intense. So what we can do is use something like the tension block, which I use all the time in my office. And you can see he's holding that there. But the tension block just has like an edge on it. If you've never seen these before, it's really cool. It has an edge on it. We can load some weight onto the end of it. And like I've literally had people come in and have to start with 2 pounds. That's all they could handle. I've also had people come in, and like I've had a climber who was a V13 climber. He had a pretty significant finger injury. His entry point was like on the 15 millimeter edge with like 35 pounds, which if you've ever hung on the 15 millimeter edge, it's no joke. But someone who climbs that hard, who's that strong, can just tolerate that even with an injury. So everybody's entry point is going to be a little different. Sometimes it depends on how much pain you're experiencing, how bad the injury is. But the first thing is, let's find your entry point and start from there. And then we can slowly grade your exposure back to climbing. So like with the finger injury, I love this example because we can slowly grade your exposure back to hanging on hangboard by adding a little bit of weight every session. And then eventually, once you're hanging on the hangboard, like now we can have you start climbing on crimps on the climbing wall. And we can slowly kind of stepwise grade your exposure back to activity. And that's exactly what you want to do. So let's talk about when you should see a professional, because this is an important question. Some of these things you can handle yourself. Some of these things you're definitely going to want to see a professional. So obviously, if there's been any trauma, if you've had a fall, if you've been in an accident or something like that, you definitely want to see a professional, because we want to rule out if something's broken. We want to rule out more sinister things. and trauma tends to correlate with things that are a little worse sometimes, not always, but yeah. So definitely if you've experienced any trauma, go see a professional. If you have any red flag symptoms, which can be for some people, neurological symptoms are kind of red flag symptoms, meaning like you're having like motor weakness or numbness and tingling, like pretty bad numbness. Sometimes people confuse that because they're like, oh yeah, I am getting a little tingly. I don't mean just like a little pins and needles. I mean like your freaking fingers are totally numb. You can't feel them or use them. That can sometimes be a red flag symptom. For a back injury, you know, if you're having numbness in your crotch area, that's kind of a red flag symptom. Any changes in bowel or bladder function is definitely a red flag symptom. So for things like that, you definitely want to go see a professional. You also want to go see a professional if you are struggling with your symptoms, like if you're having difficulty finding a starting point, like what we just talked about. If you're like, I don't know, I'm trying all these different things, I'm not able to find like any amount of exercise that I'm able to participate in, you're probably going to want to go see a professional. Or if you've tried all this stuff and you're failing to have success with getting back to these activities, probably want to go see a professional for guidance. And it doesn't always have to look like, you know, a whole rehab process where it's like, cool, you're going to be seeing me 3 times a week for the next 12 weeks and we have to stop climbing and we have to do this whole thing. Sometimes it's literally just a consult where you just need some guidelines to follow, or you just need a plan to follow, or some feedback on how you're trying to go about the process that someone can help you with. So those are good times to go see a professional. Obviously, I'm always available for consultations if you're struggling, but I think I gave you guys some pretty good things to start with. How do we know when something is a good entry point? So that's a good question. I always tell people to start with something that feels like way more regressed than maybe they can handle. If someone's experiencing back pain, for example, like maybe we're not going to throw them right on a barbell and have them deadlift. What I might have them do first is let's just bend over and touch the treatment table. Can you do that? Like, can you bend over and get your hands to like your mid thighs? Maybe we start with that. And if you can do that, maybe we work to go a little bit lower. Or what I've done for people is I've had clients come in who were having back pain and they were convinced that they couldn't bend over. They already had pain bending over a little bit and they were going to have more pain if they continued to bend over. And they are definitely going to have pain if they have to pick up anything heavy. So what I have them do is just bend over a little bit. Let's see how far you can go. And then I'll set up like some boxes and I'll put like a little kettlebell on there, like a 5-pound kettlebell. Okay, just pick that up. They go pick it up. And then I put a 10-pound kettlebell. Let's pick that up. They pick that up. And I keep putting a heavier and heavier kettlebell. And then basically at a certain point, it's pretty heavy. And they're like, yeah, I can pick that up. And I'm like, you know what you just did? You just did a deadlift. So now you're deadlifting with back pain. And that's a way to grade someone's exposure to lifting up something heavy. And from there, we can work to increase the range of motion of what they're lifting. It's an example. So just the way you can tell if it's a good entry point is if it's doable for you, it doesn't feel super threatening, it's not painful, or there's very little discomfort with it. In rehab, some discomfort is okay for sure, but it should be tolerable for you during. And so starting with something that's like tolerable is good too. So sometimes it's just playing around with intensity. Sometimes it's playing around with range of motion. Stuart says, what is a good way to address tennis elbow without stopping climbing and hangboarding? So for tennis elbow, it depends on the injury. Like it's definitely going to depend on what your elbow can tolerate. But I think finding some level of climbing that you can tolerate, probably doable and is going to be encouraged. And earlier I mentioned that if you have elbow pain, a lot of times steeper climbing can feel better for elbow pain than vertical climbing. And so sometimes it's about just changing the terrain that you're climbing on. For some people, it can be changing the intensity. So climbing on some easy stuff to start out and maybe not climbing on anything hard. And hangboarding is definitely a good exercise for elbow rehab. If you're having elbow pain with your hangboarding, it's possible that you may be hanging with a bent elbow. And I always teach
teach people to hang with a perfectly straight elbow, and that usually doesn't cause any elbow pain whatsoever. And so finding a position that's comfortable for you is a good start. And if you can't do it on the hangboard, if your body weight is already too much load for your elbow, you can find a way to take some weight off, or you can do it with like a tension block. Stephanie says, what are your thoughts of fixing an old injury, 5-year-old injury? So I get this question a lot, like, oh, I've had this injury for like 5 years. Like, can I really go back and start rehabbing it now? Like, is it going to work? Yeah, and the answer is yes. Like, you can always go back and rehab an injury. You can always go back and retrain an old injury. You can definitely do it. So it's gonna depend on the specifics of your injury. I would approach it the same way as I would approach a fresh injury, which is, step one, addressing any unhelpful thoughts you may have about the injury and educating you about what's going on. And then number two, finding an entry point for re-engaging in climbing, which is probably your ultimate goal, or re-engaging in exercise again so that we can start rehabbing. You can definitely fix an old injury. It's just about finding that starting point and beginning that process. Mariella, good to hear the little tingles aren't a major red flag. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously like a nerve thing, but that doesn't always indicate that there's like nerve damage or anything like that. So sometimes people get a little worried with like a little numbness and tingling. Sometimes that can be positional, or you slept weird or something. For nerve injuries, we're actually looking for like frank numbness and weakness, like I can't hold my coffee cup kind of thing. Those are a little bit more of red flags. And even I hesitate to even call them red flags, because sometimes it's not even a red flag. You can have a nerve injury and have numbness in your hand, and it's not a big red flag. Sometimes it's a yellow flag. Christina, how do you address the overall body fatigue that comes with injury? When is it a good time to rest versus when is it a good time to get active? So I would say it's always a good time to get active with an injury, and like getting an injury can, stress you out, and stress causes fatigue. So at the very least, you could go for a walk. Even if you can't tolerate dealing with your shoulder pain or something like that, you can still go for a walk. There's always something that you can do to stay active and keep moving when you have an injury. It's going to depend on the specifics of the injury, but you can always do something. In terms of like, when is it a good time to rest versus when is it a good time to get active? For some injuries, you can actually start right away. For other injuries, waiting like 48 hours for like initial inflammation and pain to go down is good. For other injuries, you may have to wait a little bit longer. If it's a traumatic injury, or, something that's going to require like medical intervention, then, obviously we have to wait on that. Even with pretty bad injuries, like if you're getting an ACL repair these days or a hip replacement these days, they're trying to get you moving like immediately after the surgery, because they know that the outcomes are much better if they do. So a lot of times, even if you think you can't stay moving, you can. So most of the time, rest is not going to be the answer, and getting active you can sometimes do right away. And I've done that for myself personally. I've experienced a back injury acutely in the gym before and started deadlifting again right away, obviously with less range of motion, with much lighter weight. There was even one time where I tweaked my back. I was deadlifting and I tweaked my back. I think I had warmed up to 275 on the deadlift, tweaked my back, something like popped in my back and did not feel good. And I was experiencing some pain, but I knew not to freak out. I knew to stay calm, and I knew to keep moving. So I just took all of the weight off the bar and started with the empty bar and re-warmed up basically. And I ended up working up to 300 pounds that day, and it ended up completing my actual planned training session, because I was able to like retrain my brain, like, hey, we're actually okay. This is just a little tweak, nothing to be concerned about. And I was able to completely get rid of that pain. Sophia says, always learning from you, always learning so much from you. You've changed my outlook on training. Yes, Sophia's one of my clients, my one-on-one climbing training clients. And yeah, we've worked through like a few things with her, and she's made some incredible progress in her training and has been able to reframe a lot of her thinking around pain and injury. It's been really cool to see. Thank you guys so much for attending. I hope you learned a ton. Okay, that is the end of that workshop. I hope you found this information useful and interesting. I have more information like this coming, but I just wanted to pop in at the end of the episode here and say that this was just provided for educational and informational purposes only. It does not substitute medical advice or professional services. If you have pain or an injury, definitely consult a medical professional. If you think you have a medical emergency, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room immediately. No physician patient relationship is created by listening to this podcast episode. And I do not make any representations expressed or implied with respect to the information in this podcast or to its use. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode useful, definitely let me know. Leave a comment on Spotify. Send me a message on Instagram. If you are struggling with an injury and you need help and it's not a medical emergency, I am someone that can help you with that, and you can find more information about that in the show notes or on Instagram in the link in my bio. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.